My own brother-in-law, the man who held my hand at my sister's funeral and swore to protect her memory, demanded I sign over the sanctuary I built for her, so he could bulldoze it and build a soulless golf resort. My name is Isaac Thorne, and I am 64 years old. My hands are not the hands of a businessman, they are a testament to a life lived in conversation with the earth. They are etched with the fine lines of pine sap and river silt, calloused from hoisting timber and shaping stone with tools that belonged to my father. They know the language of the forest, the precise weight of a well-balanced axe, the quiet, almost spiritual patience required to build something that feels like it grew from the land itself rather than being imposed upon it. For 35 years, my life's work, my very soul, has been a place called Havenwood. It's not a hotel, not a resort in the modern sense of the word. It's a sanctuary, nestled in a hidden cove on the Oregon coast, where the old-growth Sitka spruce stand like silent, moss-draped gods and the mist rolls in from the Pacific, blurring the line between sea, sky, and forest. I found this land when I was a young man, a wild, forgotten parcel of 800 acres that a major timber company had deemed too rugged and inaccessible to log profitably. I bought it with a small inheritance from my parents and a foolish, almost reckless amount of hope. My late wife, Clara, and I built the first cabin ourselves. We lived in a canvas tent for over a year, bathing in the icy creek and cooking over an open fire. I remember the exhaustion, the splinters, the bone-deep cold of the rainy season, but I also remember the profound joy of seeing the walls go up, of creating shelter with our own hands. We built the main lodge from reclaimed timber salvaged from a 100-year-old covered bridge that was being dismantled inland, its massive hand-hewn beams holding stories I can only imagine. Each notch and peg was a connection to a history of craftsmanship I felt a duty to honor. Over the next 3 decades, we slowly, carefully, added 12 individual cabins. Each one was a unique creation, designed to fit into its specific corner of the landscape. We tucked them into the forest, some perched on cliffs overlooking the churning sea, others nestled beside the whispering creek. They were invisible from each other, connected by winding paths of moss-covered stone that I laid myself. Our one unbreakable rule was that we would never cut down a living old-growth tree. We built around them, sometimes even incorporating their massive trunks into the structure of a cabin. Havenwood was our promise to each other and to the land, a place where people could come to disconnect from the noise of the world and reconnect with something real, something primal. It was a business, yes, but it was never about maximizing profit. It was about preserving a feeling, the feeling of being small and humbled by the majesty of nature. My younger sister, Lily, loved this place more than anyone. She was a free spirit, an artist with a wild heart who painted canvases that crackled with the energy of the coast. She found her inspiration in the quiet woods, the roar of the ocean, and the ethereal quality of the coastal light. It was here, during a summer workshop she was hosting, that she met Marcus Slade. He was a guest, a slick, impossibly charming finance guy from San Francisco who was there on a corporate wellness retreat. He was everything I wasn't, polished, ambitious, with a dazzling white smile that could sell sand in the desert. He wore expensive loafers on the hiking trails and spoke in a language of mergers, acquisitions, and leveraged buyouts. But he made my sister laugh, a deep, uninhibited laugh that I hadn't heard in years. For that, I was willing to overlook almost anything. They married a year later. I stood beside him as his best man, and I watched as he slowly, skillfully began to mold her. He coaxed her away from her messy, paint-splattered studio and into his world of charity galas, investment portfolios, and sterile art galleries where art was an asset, not a passion. She seemed happy, but I saw the light in her eyes dim just a little, the wild edges of her spirit smoothed over by his relentless polish. He convinced her to incorporate her art into a business, Lily Thorne Designs, turning her beautiful, chaotic creations into marketable prints and textiles. He was proud of its profitability, but he never seemed to understand the art itself. Then, 3 years ago, we lost her. A swift, brutal battle with pancreatic cancer that stole her from us in less than 6 months. The world turned gray. Her death hollowed me out, leaving a void that echoed with the silence of her absence. Marcus played the part of the grieving husband with an almost theatrical perfection. He was my shadow in those dark, numb months, handling the funeral arrangements, fielding calls from well-meaning friends, a pillar of stoic strength when I was crumbling. He'd sit with me in the great room of the lodge late at night, a bottle of aged whiskey between us, the fire crackling in the massive stone hearth. He would talk for hours about Lily's profound love for Havenwood. This place was her legacy, Isaac, he'd say, his voice thick with what I thought was genuine emotion. This was her true sanctuary. We have to protect it. For her. In the dense fog of my grief, I let him in. He wasn't just a brother-in-law, he was the only other person on earth who understood the magnitude of my loss. He offered to help with the books, to handle the boring business stuff that my head was too clouded to even comprehend. You focus on healing, Isaac. You've carried this place for so long. Let me take this burden off your shoulders, he insisted. He brought in his own team of accountants from the city, sharp-eyed men who spoke in a language of depreciation and amortization. He brought in his own lawyers, who talked about liability and corporate veils. He told me our simple business structure, a sole proprietorship, was dangerously inefficient and legally vulnerable. He proposed we form a new limited liability partnership. This is to protect us, Isaac, he explained one afternoon, spreading a mountain of paperwork across the great oak table in the lodge where Clara and I used to share our morning coffee. It puts all the assets, the land, the buildings, everything, into a new entity, Havenwood Holdings, LLP. It formally recognizes Lily's share of the estate, which now passes to me as her husband, and solidifies your controlling interest as the majority partner. It's just housekeeping, a way to make sure everything is legally sound for the future. He pointed to the signature lines, his pen hovering. I saw the man who had wept at my sister's bedside. I saw a brother in grief, trying to create order out of chaos. I signed everything he put in front of me. I signed the partnership formation, the transfer of assets, and a document he described as a standard operating agreement. I didn't read the fine print, the dense paragraphs that granted him, as the designated managing partner, broad executive powers to act on the partnership's behalf in all financial matters. I was too broken to care about legalese. All I cared about was that this man who loved Lily was promising to protect her legacy. If you enjoy stories of a quiet man's methodical, devastating revenge against a predator who used love as a weapon, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. We have brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The change began like a slow, insidious tide. At first, it was small things. Marcus started spending more time at Havenwood, but he wasn't there to walk the trails or sit by the ocean. He was there with men in suits, surveyors and architects who walked the property with a cold, appraising eye, their voices a jarring intrusion in the forest's quiet. He started talking about unlocking the land's potential and maximizing asset value. He commissioned feasibility studies and market analyses. When I questioned him, he'd masterfully use his grief as a shield. I'm just trying to build something that would have made Lily proud, Isaac. Something grand. Something that secures our future and honors her memory in a way the world can see. How could I argue with that? The first real alarm bell rang when he proposed we clear-cut a 20-acre section of second-growth forest on the eastern edge of the property. We can sell the timber to finance some much-needed upgrades, he argued. New plumbing, high-speed internet in the cabins. Guests expect these things now. Marcus, no, I said firmly. We don't clear-cut. That's the antithesis of everything Havenwood stands for. We built this place to escape that world, not to bring it here. He looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment, as if I were a child who couldn't understand adult matters. Isaac, that's the sentimental thinking that has kept this place from being truly profitable. It's a business, not a nature preserve. He eventually dropped the issue, but the conversation left a bitter taste in my mouth. The gut punch, the moment the fog of grief finally cleared and I saw the snake coiled in the heart of my home, came on a rainy Tuesday in early spring. He didn't ask for a meeting, he summoned me to my own office in the main lodge. He was standing by the window, looking out at the forest he was about to condemn. He was flanked by two impeccably dressed men I'd never seen before, who he introduced as Mr. Sterling and Mr. Croft, senior partners from a massive hotel development group called Westgard Resorts. Isaac, he began, his tone no longer that of a grieving brother but of a CEO delivering an ultimatum. We've had a tremendous offer. Westgard Resorts wants to partner with us. They see what I see, not 12 rustic cabins, but the potential for a 300-room luxury hotel, a state-of-the-art conference center, and a world-class 18-hole championship golf course. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room seemed to tilt. A golf course? Marcus, you can't. The North Meadow is a delicate wetland ecosystem. The runoff would destroy the salmon spawning grounds in the creek. And the main lodge? The cabins. Clara and I built those with our own hands. He gave a small, pitying sigh, the kind one gives to a beloved but senile old relative. That's the kind of thinking that has kept this place from being truly profitable for 30 years. The deal requires a complete redevelopment. The lodge, the cabins. They have to go. They're charming, but they're not up to modern luxury standards. He slid a thick, spiral-bound document across my desk. This is the proposal. And this, he slid a second thinner document over, a single piece of paper in a crisp envelope, is a buyout offer for your share of the partnership. It's generous. More money than you've ever seen. You can retire, travel the world. We'll even name the new bar in the hotel, the Thorn Lounge, in your honor. I stared at him, the man who had quoted poetry at my sister's funeral, who had spoken of her love for the untouched wilderness of this place. You want to bulldoze my wife's memory and my sister's sanctuary and name a bar after me? His face hardened then, the charming mask finally falling away completely to reveal the cold, predatory ambition beneath. Let's be clear, Isaac, because I think you're confused. This isn't a request. The partnership agreement you signed gives me the authority as managing partner to approve any deal deemed in the best financial interest of the company. Our partners at Westgard and I have already voted. The deal is moving forward. Your choice is not if this happens, but whether you take the money and walk away gracefully, or you stay and get nothing when we legally dissolve the old partnership and form the new development corporation. You used her death, I said, the words like stones in my throat. You waited until she was gone, and you used my grief to steal this from me. I'm honoring her. He shot back, his voice rising with theatrical indignation. I'm turning her quaint little hobby into a real legacy. An empire. Something that will be admired by thousands. She would have been proud of my vision. I knew then that he was a void. He had never understood her, or this place at all. He only understood value, not worth. I didn't say another word. I stood up, walked out of my office, past the smiling developers, and went to the one place he couldn't touch, the deep woods. I sat on a fallen log overlooking the hidden waterfall that Lily used to call her cathedral, and I listened to the sound of the water, the wind in the trees. And I didn't get angry. I got focused. I'm a builder. When you face a problem you can't go through, you find a way around it. You study the terrain, you read the signs, and you find the hidden weakness, the structural flaw. Marcus saw this land as a blank canvas for his greed. He didn't understand the land itself had a voice, and an army to defend it. My revenge would not be fought in a boardroom with men in suits. It would be fought with the quiet, unyielding power of the earth itself. My mise en place for this war had 3 critical ingredients. I spent the next week in a quiet fury planning. First, and most importantly, I knew something about this land that Marcus, in his arrogant dismissal of all things natural, had never bothered to learn. The North Meadow, the beautiful marshy expanse where he planned to build his golf course, was fed by a series of pristine, spring-fed streams. And in those streams, hidden under the mossy rocks, lived a tiny, incredibly rare creature, a subspecies of salamander with unique, vibrant blue spots. It was the Havenwood spotted salamander. I had discovered it years ago with a biologist friend from Portland State University. We had spent years quietly documenting its habitat, its breeding grounds, its entire life cycle. We published a small, obscure paper on it in a scientific journal, but we never filed for official protected status. We were its protectors. The threat had never been from inside. Now, this tiny, forgotten creature, no bigger than my finger, would be my champion. Second, I gathered my allies. I didn't have much money, but I had a currency Marcus would never understand: loyalty and respect. I called my longtime manager, Ilara, a fierce woman with eyes the color of the winter sea who had helped me raise the walls of the main lodge 30 years ago. I told her everything. Her response was a grim, tight-lipped nod. He'll have to go through me to get to that meadow, Isaac. What do you need? She would be my eyes and ears. I also contacted my old friend, the biologist, Dr. Alastair Finch. He was semi-retired, but still a respected voice in the conservation community. When I told him of the threat, his academic curiosity turned into righteous anger. They can't do that, he said. That habitat is irreplaceable. I'll get my research notes in order. Third, I knew I needed a legal weapon, a shark. A local lawyer wouldn't do. This required a specialist. I drove to Portland and sought out Ava Chun. Ava wasn't just an attorney. She was a legend in environmental law, a brilliant, tenacious woman known for taking on corporate giants and winning. I sat in her stark, modern office, feeling out of place in my flannel shirt and worn jeans. I laid out my story, and then I presented my 2 aces, the box of every document I had foolishly signed, and a waterproof case containing my years of meticulous research on Ambystoma maculatum havenwoodensis, the salamander. I had population counts, habitat maps, photographs, and Dr. Finch's peer-reviewed paper. She listened to my story for 2 hours without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. When I finished, a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a low, precise hum, "your brother-in-law thinks he's in a real estate negotiation. He has no idea he's about to walk into a 30-year war with the full force of the Endangered Species Act. Let's get to work." For the next 6 months, I played the part of the defeated old man, a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. It was the hardest performance I've ever given. I let Marcus and his team of architects, consultants, and soil engineers overrun Havenwood. I watched them march through the woods with their tripods and measuring tapes, their loud city voices a profane intrusion in the sacred quiet. They stuck colored flags in the ground, each one a small, plastic wound in the earth, marking the places where my cabins would be demolished and the ancient, silent trees would be cut down. I'd walk the trails early in the morning, before they arrived, and pull the flags out, a small, futile act of defiance that gave me a grim satisfaction. My longtime manager, Ilara, became my inside source, my spymaster in this quiet war. With a performance of grudging cooperation, she remained in her role, attending Marcus's planning meetings, taking notes, and feeding me information. She provided me with copies of their development plans, their environmental impact assessments, which were a complete and utter sham, a work of fiction that dismissed the North Meadow as a seasonal swamp, and, most critically, their construction schedule. The plan was to begin dredging and diverting the streams in the North Meadow in the late fall. They called it preliminary site prep, a phase they hoped to complete before the heavy winter rains and before all their final permits were officially in hand. It was a calculated risk on their part, a way to show their investors progress and lock in the construction timeline for the following spring. While Marcus was in San Francisco and New York, whining and dining his investors and selling his grand vision, I was quietly preparing my weapons. Ava Chun, my lawyer, worked with a speed and precision that was terrifying to behold. She and her team used my research and Dr. Finch's corroborating data to file a formal, exhaustive petition with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The petition was to have the Havenwood spotted salamander placed on the endangered species list on an emergency basis, citing an imminent and catastrophic threat to its only known habitat. The wheels of federal bureaucracy turn with agonizing slowness, but Ava knew exactly which levers to pull, which offices to call, and which regulations to cite to force an expedited review. We had started the clock. But a legal strategy wasn't enough. I needed to fight this in the court of public opinion. I needed to turn Havenwood from a piece of real estate into a cause. I thought about the kind of person who would understand, who could tell our story not with anger, but with a profound sense of loss. I remembered a series of articles in an old travel magazine, written by a man who went by the pen name The Wayfarer. He was a semi-anonymous, almost legendary travel writer and photographer, known for his lyrical prose and his focus on authentic experiences, on places with soul. He didn't write about five-star hotels and infinity pools. He wrote about the light in a Scottish glen, the taste of bread from a village bakery in Tuscany, the silence of a desert canyon at dawn. Finding him was difficult. He had no public profile. But after a week of searching through old publishing archives, I found the name of his former editor. I sent a simple handwritten letter to the editor's office, along with a single, stunning photograph Lily had taken of the North Meadow shrouded in morning mist. In the letter, I told him the story of Havenwood, of what it was, and what it was about to become. I didn't ask for a hit piece on Marcus. I just invited him to come and document the last days of a sanctuary, before it was bulldozed into oblivion. 2 weeks later, he arrived, unannounced. He was a quiet, unassuming man in his 50s named Elias Vance, with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. I spent a week with him. I didn't try to sell him a story. I just showed him my home. We walked the trails in silence. I told him the stories behind every beam in the lodge, of the day Clara almost cut her thumb off with a handsaw, of the look on her face when we finally lit the first fire in the hearth. I took him to the hidden waterfall, Lily's Cathedral. And finally, on a damp, misty evening, I took him to the North Meadow. We sat for hours, watching as the tiny blue-spotted salamanders emerged in the twilight. He didn't say much, but he shot thousands of photos, his camera shutter a soft, respectful whisper in the quiet air. When he left, he simply shook my hand and said, "Thank you, Isaac. I have the story." The final pieces of the board fell into place in late November. Marcus, blinded by arrogance and impatient with the permitting process, made his fatal mistake. His lawyers had assured him that the stream diversion was a minor permit, a formality. He ordered the bulldozers from a local contractor, a man I knew, who called me that night to apologize, saying he had no choice but to take the work, to start clearing the access roads and begin dredging the primary creek that fed the meadow. He had declared war on the land, and the land was about to fight back. The day the first bulldozer broke ground, its diesel engine a monstrous roar that desecrated the morning peace, Ava filed an emergency injunction in federal court. The injunction cited the pending endangered species application and the certainty of irreparable harm to a potentially protected species. At the same time, I made one phone call to the regional office of the Environmental Protection Agency's Criminal Investigation Division. I gave them the precise location, the name of the contractor, and the nature of the illegal activity, dredging a protected waterway without a permit. The next morning, two things happened simultaneously, a perfectly coordinated 1-2 punch that hit Marcus with the force of a tidal wave. First, the Wayfarer's photo essay, titled The Last Silence, a Requiem for Havenwood, was published on the website of a major international travel magazine. It was a masterpiece. It wasn't just an article, it was a eulogy. The images were heartbreakingly beautiful, the ancient trees, the hand-built cabins, the misty meadow, and a stunning macro shot of a single delicate salamander. The prose was quiet, lyrical, and devastating. It told the story of a place built with love and about to be destroyed by greed. The story went viral. It was shared tens of thousands of times by conservation groups, travel enthusiasts, and people who simply recognized an authentic story of greed versus beauty. #SaveHavenwood started trending on social media. My quiet sanctuary was suddenly the subject of a national conversation. Second, as the Wayfarer story was exploding online, 2 federal agents from the EPA and a biologist from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service drove up the long gravel road to Havenwood. They arrived to find bulldozers actively churning up the bed of a protected waterway, a clear and flagrant violation of the Clean Water Act, and actively destroying the habitat of a species with a pending endangered status. They issued a cease and desist order on the spot, impounded the heavy machinery under threat of massive fines, and slapped the partnership, Havenwood Holdings, LLP, with a notice of violation that carried fines of up to $50,000 per day, retroactive to the moment the machines started. The emergency meeting was in a sterile law office in Portland that smelled of money and fear. Marcus was there, his face pale and slack, his usual slick confidence shattered. His investors, the senior partners from Westgard Resorts, were there, their faces like stone masks of fury. I was there with Ava, who sat with a serene, almost cheerful composure. "This is a temporary setback," Marcus stammered, shuffling papers with trembling hands. "A bureaucratic nuisance. A shakedown. We'll pay the fines, we'll get the permits, and we'll get back on schedule." "You won't be getting any permits, Mr. Slade," Ava said, her voice calm and lethal. She proceeded to inform the room that, due to the irrefutable evidence of an immediate threat, the emergency petition for the Havenwood spotted salamander had been approved that morning. The North Meadow and its surrounding watershed were now designated as a federally protected critical habitat. Any development of any kind would be impossible. The golf course was dead. Furthermore, she continued, the EPA is pursuing the maximum civil and criminal penalties for the deliberate and willful destruction of the waterway. And several national conservation groups, citing the massive public outcry from the Wayfarer's article, are filing their own multi-million-dollar lawsuits against the partnership for damages to the ecosystem. Your project is not just delayed, it is over. Your entire development plan is worthless. The partnership is now facing millions in fines and years of litigation. The brand name you were buying is now publicly synonymous with environmental destruction. The lead investor from Westgard, a ruthless-looking man named Sterling, stood up. He didn't even look at Marcus. He looked directly at me. "Is there a way to salvage this?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "There is," I said, speaking for the first time, my voice steady. "You dissolve your partnership with Mr. Slade. You sell the entire 800-acre property to the newly formed Havenwood Conservation Trust, which I have established with the backing of several environmental philanthropists who contacted me after reading the Wayfarer's article. You sell it for the original price of the undeveloped land, not the inflated price of your fantasy resort. In return, the trust will assume the environmental liabilities, and the lawsuits from the conservation groups will be dropped." It was their only way out, their only chance to escape the financial and public relations nightmare Marcus had created. They took the deal. They threw Marcus to the wolves to save themselves. Marcus was utterly ruined. His investors sued him personally for fraud and gross negligence for failing to disclose the environmental risks and for his reckless actions. He was forced into bankruptcy. His reputation as a brilliant dealmaker was destroyed. The last I heard, he was selling commercial real estate in a strip mall in Scottsdale, Arizona, a world away from the misty forests he tried to conquer. He had tried to turn my sister's memory into an empire, and in the end, he was left with nothing but the ashes of his own greed. I didn't get Havenwood back as a business. I got something infinitely more precious. As the head of the Havenwood Conservation Trust, I am its caretaker, its guardian. We spent the next year healing the scars the bulldozers had left on the land. We are turning the main lodge into an educational center for environmental studies and a retreat for artists and writers. The cabins are used by visiting scientists, conservationists, and anyone who needs to find a little bit of quiet in a noisy world. My home is safe. My wife's memory is honored. And my sister's sanctuary is protected forever. My revenge was not loud. It was as quiet and persistent as the forest itself. Marcus thought he could conquer nature, that he could pave over a legacy and call it progress. He learned that some things, like the ancient trees and the tiny resilient salamanders that live in the shadow of their roots, have a power that money can't buy and bulldozers can't defeat. He tried to steal my home, but in the end, I was just the instrument of the land's own perfect and silent revenge.